When the classroom turns against you. The morning bell rang loudly, and David walked into his new school. He was nervous, his hands sweating as he held his books tightly. His mom had told him, "Be brave, you'll make new friends." But when he entered the classroom, it didn't feel like a place for friends. The room grew quiet as David walked to an empty desk. He felt every eye watching him, whispering, laughing, and staring. He tried to smile, but no one smiled back. The teacher, Mrs. Parker, introduced him quickly. "Class, this is David. Treat him kindly." But as soon as her back was turned, the whispers started again. "Why does he look like that?" one boy whispered loudly. "He talks funny," a girl muttered. David sank into his chair, wishing he could disappear. He opened his notebook and tried to focus, but the sound of giggles, tapping, and whispers filled his ears. At recess, David hoped things would get better. He walked outside slowly, looking for someone who might talk to him. He saw kids playing ball, laughing, and running, but when he got close, the ball suddenly rolled toward him. He bent down to pick it up. "Don't touch it," a tall boy named Jake shouted, running over. "That's ours. We don't want you messing it up." David froze, holding the ball. "I was just giving it back," he said softly. But Jake snatched it and pushed him back. "Stay away from us." The other kids laughed. David felt something burn inside him, anger, sadness, and loneliness all at once. He wanted to scream, but no words came out. That night, David lay in bed thinking about the day. He wanted to tell his mom, but he didn't want her to worry. He stared at the ceiling, his chest tight. "Tomorrow will be better," he whispered to himself. But deep down, he wasn't sure. The next morning, the classroom was even worse. When David walked in, someone had written on the board, "Loser." Everyone laughed as he passed by. He tried to ignore it, but his ears burned. "Hey, David," Jake called out. "Do you even know how to read? Or are you too dumb?" The class laughed again. Mrs. Parker didn't hear. She was busy looking through papers. David wanted to run out of the classroom, but he forced himself to sit. He thought of his mom's words, "Be brave." But bravery felt heavy, like a mountain crushing him. He clenched his pencil so hard it almost broke. The day dragged on, every moment heavier than the last. When the final bell rang, David was the first one out. He ran down the hall, his bag bouncing on his back. But as he turned the corner, he froze. Jake and two other boys were waiting for him. "Going somewhere, new kid?" Jake smirked. David's heart pounded. His legs felt weak. He looked around, but the hall was empty. No teachers. No students. Just them. Jake stepped closer. "You don't belong here. And if you don't leave, we'll make sure you regret it." The other boys cracked their knuckles, ready. David swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. He wanted to scream for help, but the words were stuck in his throat. The classroom wasn't just against him anymore. The whole school felt like it was. And deep down, David knew this was only the beginning. David backed away slowly, his backpack sliding off his shoulder. His breathing was fast, his palms sweating. Jake smiled like a wolf ready to attack. "Scared already? You should be. This is our school. You don't belong here." One of the boys, Mark, stepped forward and shoved David's shoulder. David stumbled but didn't fall. His chest hurt from holding back tears. "Leave me alone," David whispered, but his voice shook. "What was that?" Jake asked, laughing. "Speak up, loser." David felt cornered. His body wanted to run, but his legs felt like stone. Suddenly, a teacher's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Jake quickly pushed David against the lockers and whispered, "This isn't over. Tomorrow, after school, we'll be waiting." Then they walked away, smiling as if nothing had happened. David stayed frozen for a moment. His heart was beating so hard it hurt. He picked up his bag and walked home, his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. At dinner, his mom asked, "How was school today?" David forced a smile. It was fine. But deep inside, it wasn't fine. It was worse than yesterday. That night, he had a nightmare. In the dream, the whole classroom stood up, pointing at him, chanting, "Loser, loser, loser." He woke up sweating, his chest tight. The next day, David walked into school slowly, hoping Jake had forgotten. But he hadn't. When David opened his locker, he found trash stuffed inside. Rotten food, crumpled papers, and a note that said, "Go back to where you came from." The laughter behind him told him exactly who had done it. Jake and his friends leaned against the wall, smiling like they owned the world. David clenched his fists. He wanted to fight back, but he knew if he tried, they would crush him. He went into the classroom and sat at his desk, trying not to cry. But then, something unexpected happened. A girl named Sarah, who sat near him, leaned closer and whispered, "Don't listen to them. They're just bullies." David looked at her, surprised. It was the first kind word anyone had said to him since he came to the school. But before he could reply, Jake noticed. "Hey, Sarah!" Jake shouted. "You like the loser now? Careful, or you'll end up like him." The class laughed, and Sarah pulled back, her face turning red. David lowered his head. The small hope he had felt disappeared like smoke in the air. The bell rang, and Mrs. Parker walked in. But David didn't hear her words. He only heard Jake's laughter echoing in his head. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, David tried to sneak out quickly. But Jake was already waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "You thought we forgot?" Jake said. "Let's take a walk, loser." Mark and the other boy closed in, blocking David's path. David's heart sank. He knew there was no escape this time. They led him behind the school where no teachers could see. Jake pushed him against the fence. "You better learn your place. If you don't, we'll teach you the hard way." David's chest rose and fell quickly. His whole body shook. Then Jake raised his fist. David closed his eyes. But before the punch landed, a loud voice shouted, "Hey! What are you doing?" Everyone froze. David opened his eyes. Standing at the edge of the field was someone he didn't expect. It was Daniel, the quiet kid from the back of the classroom. He was watching with angry eyes. Jake lowered his fist slowly. "Mind your business, Daniel." But Daniel didn't back down. "Leave him alone." The air grew tense. David's heart raced. For the first time, someone was standing up for him. But would Daniel's courage be enough? Or would Jake turn against both of them? Jake's eyes narrowed as he stared at Daniel. The laughter from the other boys faded. Even Mark looked unsure for a moment. "You think you can stop us?" Jake sneered, stepping toward Daniel. Daniel didn't move. He wasn't tall, and he wasn't strong-looking, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Jake pause. "Yeah," Daniel said firmly. "Leave him alone. Or I'll tell Mrs. Parker what you've been doing." Jake smirked. "You think anyone will believe you? Everyone's on my side. Nobody likes him. Nobody will listen." Daniel's fists tightened. "I'll make them listen." For a moment, the world felt frozen. David's heart thumped loudly, his hand shaking as he looked from one boy to the other. Jake finally gave a short laugh and stepped back. "Fine. We'll let him go for now. But this isn't over." He shoved David hard against the fence before turning away with Mark and the other boy. Their laughter echoed as they walked off. David sank to the ground, his legs weak. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Daniel knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" David looked at him with wide eyes. "Why did you help me?" Daniel shrugged. "Because it's not fair. What they're doing is wrong. David swallowed hard. For the first time since he came to the school, he didn't feel completely alone. But deep down, he knew Jake wasn't done. That night, David kept replaying the scene in his head. Jake's words haunted him, "Nobody likes you. Nobody will listen." What if he was right? The next day, things got worse. When David walked into the classroom, whispers filled the air. Someone had spread a rumor that David cried behind the school like a baby. Kids laughed as he passed, pointing and covering their mouths. Jake smirked from his seat. "Careful, everyone. Don't make the baby cry again." David's ears burned. He wanted to disappear. Daniel leaned over and whispered, "Ignore him." But ignoring wasn't easy. The laughter followed David everywhere. At lunch, David and Daniel sat together at the edge of the cafeteria. It was quiet until Sarah walked over with her tray. She hesitated, then sat down with them. "Hey," she said softly. David blinked in surprise. You want to sit here?" Sarah nodded. "I don't care what they say. Jake thinks he runs the school, but he doesn't." David felt something warm in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't eating alone. But the moment didn't last. Across the cafeteria, Jake slammed his tray down and shouted, "Look! The loser's building a loser club." The whole cafeteria roared with laughter. Sarah's face went red, Daniel clenched his fists, and David stared down at his food, fighting tears. That night, David couldn't sleep. His heart was heavy. He felt like no matter what he did, Jake would always find a way to crush him. But then, as he lay in bed, a thought sparked in his mind. What if I stop being scared? What if I fight back, not with fists, but with something else? He didn't know how yet. But he knew one thing: if he didn't stand up soon, Jake would destroy him completely. High voltage sign: the tension is building. David now has Daniel and Sarah on his side, but Jake is tightening his grip on the whole class. Do you want me to continue straight into the next big turning point, where David starts fighting back in clever ways, or should I keep dragging the suspense with more bullying before the shift? You said? Continue. ChatGPT said. Got it, white heather check mark. Yeah, I'll keep the suspense rolling and push the story forward. David is at his breaking point, but the shift hasn't come yet. Here's the continuation. The next morning, David walked into class, his eyes tired from lack of sleep. He could feel everyone's stares before he even sat down. On his desk, someone had left a note. "Cry baby." His chest tightened, but he didn't tear it up. Instead, he folded it slowly and placed it in his notebook. Jake smirked from across the room. "What's the matter, David? Want me to bring you a pacifier?" The whole class burst into laughter again. Even kids who hadn't been laughing before joined in now, afraid to be Jake's next target. Mrs. Parker looked up from her papers. "That's enough. Settle down." The class went quiet, but only on the outside. David could still feel their eyes drilling into him. At recess, David sat on the swings alone while Daniel played basketball with Sarah nearby. He tried to pretend everything was fine, but inside, he was sinking deeper. Then, Jake and his friends appeared again. They didn't touch him this time, but they circled him like wolves. Jake leaned close. "You think Daniel and Sarah will protect you? They won't. Tomorrow, they'll be laughing at you too. Just wait." David stayed silent, staring at the ground. Jake smirked and walked away. Sarah ran over afterward. "Don't listen to him, David. He's just trying to scare you." But David wasn't so sure. Jake's words crawled into his head like poison. That night, David sat at his desk with the crybaby note in front of him. His hands trembled as he thought about how everyone looked at him. Maybe Jake's right. Maybe no one will ever listen to me. But then he remembered Daniel's voice, because it's not fair. And Sarah's words, "I don't care what they say." For the first time, David realized something. He wasn't completely powerless. He had at least 2 people on his side. The next day, something strange happened. During reading time, Mrs. Parker asked volunteers to read aloud. Nobody raised their hand. But then Daniel raised his and said, "David should read. He's really good." The room went silent. Jake laughed. "David? He can barely talk without crying." Mrs. Parker frowned. "Enough, Jake. David, would you like to try?" David froze. His palms grew sweaty, his throat tight. He wanted to say no. But then he saw Daniel's encouraging nod. Sarah gave him a small smile too. David took a deep breath and stood up. He began reading slowly, his voice shaky at first. The words felt heavy, like they might trip him. But as he kept going, his voice grew stronger. The classroom, usually filled with laughter and whispers, grew quiet. For the first time, David felt like everyone was actually listening, not laughing, not mocking, listening. When he finished, Mrs. Parker clapped softly. "Well done, David." Sarah clapped too. Daniel followed. A few other kids joined in. But Jake sat in the back, his face red, his fists clenched. When the bell rang, Jake stormed out without a word. David sat back down, his heart pounding. For the first time since he came to the school, he felt something new. Hope. But he didn't know that Jake's silence was more dangerous than his laughter. Because when Jake didn't laugh, it meant he was planning something worse. Jake didn't show up for recess the next day. That made David nervous. A quiet Jake was scarier than a loud one. During lunch, David, Daniel, and Sarah sat together again. For the first time, David actually laughed at something Daniel said. The laughter felt strange, almost new, but it warmed his chest. Then, across the cafeteria, Jake appeared. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even joking around with his friends. Instead, he carried a tray and walked straight past David's table without a word. Sarah whispered, "That's weird." Daniel nodded. "Too weird." David swallowed hard. He could almost feel the storm coming. When classes ended that afternoon, David headed to his locker. As soon as he opened it, a horrible smell hit him. Everyone nearby started gagging. Inside his locker was rotten eggs, smashed all over his books and bag. The crowd of kids around him gasped, then burst into cruel laughter. "Ooh, David stinks. Rotten boy. Don't get too close, he smells like garbage." David froze, his face burning. His stomach twisted as the laughter filled the hallway. He looked around desperately, hoping someone would help. But even kids who weren't usually mean were laughing now, pointing at him. Jake leaned against the lockers, smirking. "Told you, loser. You don't belong here." Daniel pushed through the crowd, his fists clenched. "Enough, Jake." But Jake only laughed harder. "What are you gonna do, quiet boy? Cry with him." Sarah grabbed David's hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." They ran down the hall together while the laughter echoed behind them. David's chest felt like it was breaking apart. That night, David sat on his bed, his bag ruined, his books covered in the awful smell. He wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, he felt something different. Anger. For the first time, the anger was bigger than the fear. Bigger than the sadness. "They want me to break," he whispered to himself. "But I won't. Not anymore." He looked at the crumpled crybaby note, still folded in his notebook. His hand shook as he picked it up. Slowly, he tore it into tiny pieces and let them fall to the floor. The next day at school, David walked in with his head higher. He still heard whispers. He still saw stares. But inside, something had changed. Jake noticed it too. He frowned as David walked past him without flinching. At recess, Jake approached again, ready to mock. But David looked him straight in the eyes and said, You don't scare me anymore." The crowd around them gasped. Jake blinked, surprised. "What did you just say?" David's voice shook, but he didn't back down. "I'm not scared of you." Jake's face twisted in anger. He shoved David hard, knocking him to the ground. But this time, David didn't stay down. He stood back up, dirt on his clothes, fire in his eyes. "You can push me," David said, breathing hard. "But I won't stay down." For the first time, Jake didn't have a comeback. The crowd was silent, waiting. And in that silence, something powerful shifted. David wasn't the same boy anymore. The silence after David's words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Jake looked caught off guard. His smirk faded, replaced by a glare that could cut glass. "You think you're brave now?" Jake hissed. "We'll see how long that lasts." He turned and stormed away, but not before muttering something to his friends. Their low laughs made David's stomach twist. Daniel walked over quickly. "That was risky, David." Sarah nodded. "Jake doesn't like being challenged." David swallowed hard. "I don't care. I can't keep running." But deep inside, a knot of fear still sat heavy. The next day, the trap was set. When David entered the classroom, everyone was staring at him again. Whispers spread like fire. Giggles, pointing fingers, and secretive looks followed him all the way to his seat. He frowned. "What's going on?" Daniel shrugged nervously. "I don't know, but something's wrong." Then, Mrs. Parker walked in and called for silence. "Class, settle down. Today, we'll begin with a quick check of homework." David reached into his bag for his notebook, but froze. His notebook wasn't there. Instead, inside his bag was a crumpled piece of paper covered in ugly, mean drawings, cartoons of the teacher, of other students, and even of Jake, drawn in a way that made him look like a pig. Gasps filled the room as Jake shouted, "Mrs. Parker! Look! David's been making fun of everyone." All eyes turned to David. His chest went cold. "No. That's not mine." But Mrs. Parker picked up the paper, frowning deeply. "David, is this yours?" David shook his head quickly. "I swear I didn't do that. Someone planted it in my bag." But Jake shouted, "Liar! I saw him with it yesterday." "Yeah, me too," another kid chimed in, one of Jake's friends. More voices joined in, the classroom spinning with accusations. "I saw him laughing at it. He was hiding it in his desk. He's been doing this the whole time." David's voice cracked. "No. That's not true." But it didn't matter. The room was against him again. Mrs. Parker's face was stern. "David, come with me. We're going to the principal's office." The class exploded into laughter and whispers as David stood, his face hot, his heart pounding. He looked around desperately, but all he saw were cold, judging eyes. Except two. Daniel's fists were clenched on his desk, his jaw tight with anger. Sarah's eyes were wide, full of worry. As Mrs. Parker led David out, he heard Jake's low voice behind him. "Told you, loser. Nobody will believe you." The hallway was quiet, but inside David's head, the storm was raging. His stomach hurt. His eyes burned. How did Jake do this? How can I fight back if everyone is against me? He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. This wasn't just bullying anymore. Jake was destroying him, piece by piece. And David knew if he didn't find a way to turn it around soon, he'd be crushed completely. The walk to the principal's office felt like the longest walk of David's life. His shoes felt heavy, his throat dry, and his heart shattered. They all hate me and they'll never believe me. Inside the office, Mrs. Parker placed the crumpled drawings on the desk. "Mr. Wilson, I found this in David's bag. He says it isn't his, but the class insists otherwise." The principal looked at David over his glasses. David, did you make these? David shook his head quickly, his voice trembling. No, sir. I didn't. I swear I didn't. Mr. Wilson sighed. It doesn't look good. David's chest hurt. His eyes filled with tears. Please? I didn't do it. Someone's trying to make me look bad. And just then, the door burst open. Daniel and Sarah stood there, out of breath, their faces red with determination. Wait! Daniel shouted. David didn't do it. Everyone turned in shock. Sarah stepped forward, holding her phone in her hand. We have proof. She placed it on the principal's desk and hit play. The screen lit up with a shaky video, Jake and his friends laughing as they stuffed the crumpled paper into David's bag. David gasped. His heart leapt. The principal's face hardened. He watched the video twice, then slowly set the phone down. His eyes turned cold. So it wasn't David. Daniel's voice shook, but it was strong. Jake's been bullying him since the first day. Everyone just laughed or ignored it. But it's true. He's been hurting David this whole time. Mrs. Parker's hand covered her mouth, her eyes filling with guilt. For a moment, the room was silent. Then David's tears finally spilled, but they weren't just tears of pain anymore. They were tears of release, of being seen. Mr. Wilson stood firmly. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Sarah. I'll deal with Jake. But David, he looked at the boy gently. I'm sorry this happened to you. David couldn't speak. He only nodded, wiping his face. That afternoon, when David returned to class, it was different. The whispers were gone. The laughter was gone. And for the first time, the eyes staring at him weren't mocking, they were guilty, ashamed. Jake's seat was empty. Mrs. Parker's voice trembled as she addressed the class. I want everyone to remember this. Words hurt. Lies hurt. Cruelty hurts. But kindness saves. She turned to David. I'm sorry. And then, slowly, something amazing happened. Sarah reached out and took David's hand. Daniel put his hand on his shoulder. And one by one, kids who had laughed at him before began walking up, saying small, quiet words, sorry, David. I shouldn't have laughed. I was wrong. The weight that had crushed him for weeks lifted, piece by piece. For the first time, David smiled through his tears. That night, lying in bed, he whispered to himself, I made it. I'm not alone anymore. And for the first time since the classroom had turned against him, he finally felt like he belonged.